I would like to invite on the stage Diego Soroa with his speech, Beyond Digital, the Exponential Transformation. Adapt your business model to leverage abundance and scale exponentially.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for your attention, for your time, and thanks for being seated here comfortably, I assume. I want to start with a provocative thought. And actually, I want to start with this idea that I was exposed to not too long ago. Any company designed to success in the 20th century is doomed for failure in the 21st century. How many people agree with this idea? Okay, how many people think it might be a little exaggerated? Okay, great, because it's precisely to you to whom I want to address. My intention here is try to convince you, to give you some ideas, insights, and thoughts to maybe reconsider your opinion, okay? And we are seeing this across the world. We are seeing that many companies that we're working with across the globe, they're feeling a little bit like this mammoth. They see that the change is coming, massive change is coming, and they know that they need to change, but they don't know exactly what to do. It's a matter of scale. Do they need to cut their hair or to grow their horns a little bit smaller or bigger? What is it that they need to do? So there's some confusion that we are seeing across the globe. And see, this confusion actually is ratified by the numbers that we are seeing here. This is a lifespan of a Fortune 500 company in 1960. It was over 60 years. The average lifespan of these companies. And now we see that it's under 20 years. This is another representation of that same logic, of that same reality. We see that the average company lifespan is decreasing systematically. There is a trend here. There is a pattern. So if we go to the numbers more specifically, we'll see that very traditional companies that we could probably all have heard of, like Sears or JCPenney or so on, and we look at their valuation increases or decreases in this case, we see massive failures. We see that they are decreasing massively, and yet we still see that there's some people that seem to have cracked the code. So some are crashing. They're not leveraging trends or technologies. They're not leveraging the new value propositions or the new business models. And some others seem to be crashing it. These people, these companies, are having the opposite results. In under 10 quarters, they are duplicated, increasing by 10, by 50, by 10,000 their results. So what's going on here? Some are really crashing, some others are leveraging everything that's happening to crash it. So we also see that for some companies, the time that it takes them to become a 1 billion market capitalization company is also decreasing. I mean, back in the years, it was like 20 years old, what any company would need to become a billion-dollar company. And now we see that is literally months. So we could say that there is something going on. The metabolism of the companies seems to be accelerated. It is definitely time of change. And everybody systematically will tell us that technology is the cause. Technology is changing the world. But is it? So undoubtedly, we are seeing what we call the exponential technologies. These technologies that are doubling their price performance in under 9 months, 18 months in some cases. They're growing, changing at an exponential pace. Gordon Moore introduced with his Moore's law this principle. He looked at the number of transistors, number of components in an integrated circuit, and he observed that they were doubling every 9 months. And he made a forecast that this tendency will continue over the years. He proposed 5 years, but then he observed that it had worked for over 10 years and also retrospectively. So this is a trend that we can observe more specifically in an example. This is the self-driving car. Everybody's now jumping to the self-driving car. But when it started back in the days, it was a very, very expensive technology. Over $300,000 just to get ready the material to make this functionality available for any car. So it was like a long shot, a moonshot, something that our kids would definitely not see. Maybe our grandkids, but definitely not our kids, maybe definitely not ourselves either. But then we see that following that trend, the cost of the LiDAR, which is a technology that scans everything on real time, has actually seems to be following that pattern. In 2012, we're talking about $17,000 for that little piece of hardware. Then in 2017, it dropped down to $50. And the price point, or the expectation for 2020 is that the price will still drop. So there'll be a moment in which the car will have plenty of LiDARs, if there's not another technology substituting this one. So we see that the price cost is really falling at an exponential pace. And this is happening across technologies. So every single one of these technologies could be described as an exponential technology. Here's a list of 16, 12. Well, some others have 16, some others have 20. But the thing is that each one of these technologies has an amazing potential impact on our reality. And then we see that they're converging. They're not acting individually, they are retrofitting themselves. So that's making even more of an accelerated pace of change. So these convergence we can also observe in this graph here. We see, well, this is a plot of the technological advances of humanity, obviously simplified. And we see that there is a convergence at the end. Once we start with new scientific discoveries and new technologies, that seems to create an exponential effect. And we can see that on the curve that is represented here. So we have two patterns to observe here. One is the convergence, and the other one is the exponential change. So what happens with this exponential change is that it is non-intuitive. With all these exponential technologies like VR or self-driving cars, I mean, they're really nice, but maybe they're not there yet. There is a phase which is called the disappointment of the deceptive phase, in which, yeah, I mean, these eventually could be awesome, but still not there. And then suddenly something changes, and the technology seems to boom. So Gordon Moore on the exponential curve suggests that this is not something that happens overnight. It takes some time. So if you can identify this exponential pace of change in whatever technology, maybe it'll make sense for you to start investing today, because if you invest 5 years from now when it's mainstream, it probably will be too late. But you can trust that this exponential pace of change will continue on the majority of the technologies. Just go ahead and make your research and observe that pattern. So for the majority of the people that don't follow that pattern, change seems to happen in two ways, gradually and then suddenly. And then what some people call the Black Swans, like where did these come from, right? Everything seems to change in the blink of a moment, in a blink of an eye. And our capability to anticipate these changes is really, really bad. So if I tell you, for example, we're going to do 30 linear steps. Linear is the logic that we are used to. Linear is the logic that our brain understands. If I take 30 linear steps, that's going to take me out of the building. But if I ask you, where would 30 linear exponential steps take me? See, that is so big of a number that it really goes beyond our comprehension. Our brains are not designed to work that way. So we don't understand it. Even though we might agree with this exponential logic, we just don't understand it. We don't get it. Because in fact, 30 exponential steps will take us 27 times across the globe, I believe. So still, we are seeing that technology is changing everything very fast. But the point I want to make is that it is not the technology that we should be looking at. Yes, we should start running our experiments with technology, but maybe it is not only the technology. Apparently, we're going to the moon, back to the moon, maybe next year or 2 years from now. There's going to be a lot of commercial companies proposing lunar expeditions. So maybe we might see a traffic jam in the moon soon enough. All of these companies are trying to reach the moon. This is going to be quite interesting. These kind of expeditions were only pursued by countries in the past. And now we see that large companies are starting to follow these ventures. And Naveed Jain put it in a very eloquent way. Today, companies are doing what only countries used to do, and individuals, freaks in their homes, they're doing what only large companies used to do. So this is the Israel expedition that just failed massively, but they're going to go back because they know that learning happens through systematic experimentation. So they'll go there and they'll learn, because now that is accessible for many, many other people. How many of you have seen this movie, The Martian? So this is a movie, a very nice movie, I would say, about taking people to Mars. And this movie, the cost of this movie was $100 million. But then the Indian government sent a probe to Mars that cost $70 million. So this is what's happening. Making a movie about taking someone to Mars is more expensive than actually sending something to Mars, which is kind of interesting. My point here is that these technologies, the access to these technologies is lowering. We are lowering the barriers of entry. The price performance, doubling every 18 months, every 9 months, is making them accessible for everyone. And then we have stories such as this one. Who's heard of Jack and Draka? Some of you? So Jack and Draka was a high school back in the days, a high school boy, 13 years old, 14, and a friend of his at high school passed away because of pancreatic cancer. And he was so really disappointed and sad about this that he started doing his own research on the internet. And he tried to come up with a system for early detection of pancreatic cancer. I mean, there had to be something that he could do. So he went back to the internet and tried to not replicate all of the research that were done, but understand what was not working. And he was massively successful. Nobody wanted to hear from him at the beginning. He was like, yeah, let's welcome this guy, give him a job or something. But eventually someone did pay attention to what he was doing. And he had a massive success. He was able to propose an early detection system of pancreatic cancer for under $25. And he was 14 years old. See, that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying lowering the levels of entry to technology. But not only that, but just recently, I just discovered that somebody even was more surprising than him. So it's not about accessing the information. It's not about the technology, because the information is available and the technology will be available. That is not what's going to make the difference on our approaches. This guy, Rishabh Jain, he was 13 when he was worried also about pancreatic cancer. But he went even further. He wanted to come up with an early, not detection, but with a system to cure cancer using AI. And he was successful too. It was a high school project. So it's no longer great pharma, it's a 13-year-old boy that can access these technologies and this level of information and make a huge of a difference. So we're talking a lot about digitization. And yes, digitization, and it's really important, but it's only the beginning. It's not really where the massive changes happen. And there's a lot of changes with that. Mark Andreessen mentioned software is eating the world. And yes, it is eating the world. And not only that, but we're seeing that the value chain is being completely, the value pyramid is being completely inverted. In the past, it was all about solids, about extracting, transporting, building. And now it's all about information. And this concept of the digitization not only is affecting the pyramid of value, but also it's affecting ourselves as individuals. Raymond McCauley, a biotech and bioinformatics faculty member of Singularity, proposed this comparison between the computers and the DNA. And he mentioned very different steps to compare these two systems. And actually, this is precisely what's happening, he says. We are now able to digitize our DNA. And once you've digitized it, you start to understand it. And you can start playing with it, writing it, and you can start changing ourselves. So this is what's happening. We are changing ourselves. And if we want to look at another evolution of these exponential technology, we'll see that the price of sequencing a human genome is following that pattern that I described at the beginning. Sequencing all of the 3.2 billion letters of our genome back in the days, in 2000, was 100 million effort and 9 months of time. Today, it's $1,000 per genome. And within 2 years, it'll probably cost under $100 per genome, and it'll be done in less than an hour. So eventually, flushing your toilet will be more expensive than sequencing your genome. And that's probably what we'll be doing. We have massive drop cost, and we have people with the expertise, like this 8-year-old girl that happens to know exactly the angle that she has to put on her instruments to make DNA experiments. And they do things like this. This glowing plant, inoculating the genome of a glowing squid into a plant. But they also do other things like this. This is a glowing cat, and it's a real cat. I think this is pretty scary. But this definitely goes beyond the digitization. This is changing ourselves. And Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, was suggesting that this fourth industrial revolution that we're entering doesn't only change the way we do things, it changes ourselves. So maybe some of you are starting to have this fear feeling. It's your amygdala. Douglas Adams said, anything that happens after you're 35 is like a major risk that goes against nature. I am 44, and I'm still trying to understand and decipher all of these, the implication of all of these technologies. With these, what's also happening is that the problems that we're facing are changing. I'm going to give you a very quick example. I was working with these people not too long ago. Racine is a company that does suspension engines for trucks and for Maserati and for Tesla. And we were entertaining the concept of exponential design. What if designers could be disrupted? What if designers could be automated with generative design and so on? And that was really, really effective, very interesting. In just 5 weeks, we were able to lower the weight of this piece, this component, in 10%, which is massive. But what was more beautiful was them realizing that now that the cars are going to be electric, the noise was going to be a major factor, a major problem that they'll need to be solving. And that problem of the noise was not there in the past, because the engine will make much more noise than these components. So now they're facing a new problem. This is a very simple example of how new problems are arising. But I want to go beyond that. So these exponential technologies are bringing new problems, and we need to be ready to identify those problems. But as I said, I'm going to go beyond that. I'm an architect, and one of the technologies that I'm really interested on is the self-driving car. As an architect, I understand that technologies change the shape of the city. The elevators allow us to go vertical, to grow the city vertically. And the car allows us to go horizontally, okay? So the urban sprawl is possible just because of the car. Now that we have a major change in this technology, we can expect a major change of the way that we design our cities and the way of we live our cities. So I'm really interested on these technology. These in Singularity University, I was able to test that car. Look at the face, the stupid face that I had here when I figured that it really worked without me intervening at all. So, but that also brings new problems. Like what? Well, what if there's a car accident? Who pays for that? So recently, all of these companies that are jumping into this field space, they realize that they need to change the value proposition or to add something to it, because the problems that they were facing were new. And hence Volvo CEO said recently that they'll accept all of the liabilities of the accidents that happen while the cars are driving in a self-driving car. That is a massive change on the value proposition and on the business model. And what happened to insurance companies? Who could expect, right, that the car industry, the car makers would be assuming the role of the insurance provider? So exponential technologies are creating new problems that require new value propositions and new business models. And I want to go yet beyond that with an example that probably everyone has heard of, which is the Kodak example. But hopefully I'll give you a different perspective to this example. So Kodak was massive back on the days. In 1998, they were like the #1. I mean, they owned the market. 85% of all of the films sold and produced were theirs. But then something happened. Everybody knows what happened. They had a market or a value proposition or a business around this, selling films, basically. So probably some of you, or many of you actually, might have used these films. You know that these films were expensive. 36 pictures, 24, 12. So you took them with care because they were expensive. You don't want to be wasting them. They were scarce. And the business model of Kodak was created all around that scarcity. We are very good at the chemistry of the films. We are very good at dealing that scarcity. But then something happened. Well, there's a story that says that this guy from Kodak invented the digital camera, and that is true. But there's some people that, there doesn't seem to be agreement. Was he asked to put the invention in the drawer and to hide it, or was he given the resources? As I understand, he was actually given the resources to further develop it. But that disruptive technology popped up in a context that was not fertile. Nothing was ready in that company to foster and manage this kind of innovation because it was killing the status quo. Nobody wanted to really hear about that. So what happened? Suddenly, we went from the 24 film cameras rolls to the infinite exposures. And now we have a new problem. What is the new problem when you have infinite exposures? You have just too many photos, too many images. You don't even know what to do with them. And Kodak did not react to that new problem space. The problem had changed, but they didn't. And who identified this problem space? A completely different company. Actually a startup done by just 30 people the moment in which it was sold. So we see that Kodak fail massively, while a bunch of teenagers or youngsters creating a startup were reaching $1 billion market capitalization with Instagram. Because Instagram is about solving that problem that we have of the abundance of pictures. How do you deal with that abundance? Kodak did not even enter that field. So the people that understand this transition from scarcity to abundance are much more ready to understand how they can serve the new needs, right? This is what is redefining organizations, the transition between scarcity and abundance. And I'm going to give you an example that is given in this book that is very interesting, actually. This is a book by Peter Diamandis. He's one of the founding members of Singularity University. And if you realize here on this huge screen that we have, you'll see that the book is covered in aluminum foil, right? And there's a reason for that. He uses aluminum foil as a story to give an example of how something that was really scarce in the past ended up becoming something massively abundant. And he says that, the king of Siam was Napoleon III was receiving the king of Siam. So he wanted to impress him. And instead of in the banquet, instead of giving him the silverware of platinum or gold, and the dishes and everything, he was received with aluminium. Because aluminium, even though it's the 8th more frequent material in the earth crush, it was really, really very expensive. Because it was very complicated to separate the aluminium from the bauxite. Until some chemists came up with the electrolysis, a technology or a process that allows for that easy separation of these two materials. And suddenly, aluminium became very abundant. And now aluminium is, as we know, something that we dispose of systematically. And that concept of going from the scarcity to the abundance is precisely the effect of the exponential technologies. And it's happening across bits and across atoms. We see the atoms, the aluminiums, many, many things are now becoming abundant, but also we see it in communication. And we see that there's many different communications being liberated, many abundances being liberated currently. We have an abundance of communication. It all started with the Gutenberg, right? The one-to-many communication was enabled. But now we're in the Zuckerberg moment in which many-to-many communication is available. And we have just announced the quantum supremacy. We have abundant computing power, or we will get there. And if you look at the price point of the energy, you'll see that it keeps on dropping. And that doesn't just stop at some point. It will keep on dropping until the cost of it will be zero. Abundance intelligence, data, abundance people, and these are generic abundances. But if you can identify a specific abundance that you could leverage, that's when the magic starts to happen. So we see that the exponential technologies are leveraging these abundances. So it is precisely this concept of abundance that I want you to take home. We still see a lot of people that prefer, and this is like a very intelligent person, that prefers to work around scarcity. They only invest on the things that have a clearly defined, unprotected competitive advantage. So they want walls, they want moats, right? Because they protect you from the outside. But these very moats and barriers that protect you from the outside are the things that prevent you from changing. They're constraining your change. So there's other people that we could argue that are just as intelligent, like Elon Musk suggesting that if your sole protection against innovation are these modes, well, maybe you should reconsider that. Scarcity was the business model of the 20th century. And now we have completely new challenges. So what is the business model of abundance? What is the business model that makes sense in this fourth industrial revolution? We saw this in the previous presentation. There is some very clear example of what's going on, what's happening. Uber, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles. Facebook, no content. Alibaba, no inventory. Airbnb, no real estate. Something really interesting is happening. Take a moment here to observe what I just mentioned. The core activities and the core functionalities and the core values of these companies are not owned by them. They're leveraging them. They have identified an abundance, and what they're doing is leveraging that abundance. So that allows them to change and to grow at a massive pace. at an exponential pace. They're changing just as fast as technology. So that is something really desirable. Instead of being constrained to your assets, to your own capabilities, try to identify abundances out there and connect to those abundances, then manage those abundances and offer something infinitely scalable. Okay? So, again, exponential technologies are liberating abundances, and these abundances are bringing disruptions. They're changing the problem, they're changing the value proposition, they're changing the solution. So to that, we need to react with new business models. Okay? So my suggestion here would be, think, what is the scarcity that your company is managing? Because in the past, it was all about identifying a scarcity, an asset, a product, or a service, putting some barriers around it, and providing only control access to those assets, those goods. Probably your company is built around a scarcity. Can you identify that scarcity? Because if you can, maybe you're a little more ready to identify what is the abundance that might replace that scarcity. Okay? So find the barriers of entry to your industry. It might be the scale, it might be the switching cost, it might be the intangible assets, it might be a regulation, it might be anything. Find that supposed thing that is protecting and giving a competitive advantage to unfair competitive advantage to your industry or to your company, and try to reinterpret disruption through the lens of those modes. So to put it in other terms, it's time to think not outside the box, but outside the mode. All right? If we want to scale, if we want to have a massive impact, if we want to have a massive capability of adaptation and change, we have to identify our modes and revisit them. Because disruption will happen precisely at those modes. So many companies are doing disruption research, and they seek for exponential technologies, and they seek for, what can we do with this technology in our company? So that research is vague, random. But if you try to reinterpret your modes in your company through the lens of these disruptions, these exponential technologies, then maybe you'll find something. Nobody knows where disruption might come from. Probably because we're not looking in the right direction, or we're not looking wide enough. So, what is the abundance that you're leveraging? What abundances could you be leveraging? There's many. There's not one single answer to this. But if you find one, you might be into something really, really big. Because we've seen that current business models no longer work. They don't work for abundance. So what works? Well, the first thing that will work is understanding that changing landscape requires changing perspective. Okay, because otherwise we're going to be limited to interpreting the old through the lens of the new. And that has some inconvenience. Let me give you an example. This is a typical factory of an English factory of 200 years ago. So you see that the whole layout here, depending on a huge steam engine upstairs, and all of the machines were connected with a band to that huge engine. So suddenly, at the beginning of the 20th century, the electric engine appeared. And they say, wow, now this is awesome. This is a much more efficient engine. We're going to substitute the upper engine with this electric one. And we're going to have, awesome benefits, much more efficient and everything. And so they did. But that was very limited, wasn't it? It took them 20 years to realize what the full potential of the new technology was. The new technology, the electric engine, was bringing something much more important, was bringing mobility to each one of the engines. So they could place one small engine, one small electric engine in each one of these machines, and just swift around, change the display. But they didn't understand that. It took them 20 years, because they kept on interpreting their reality through the lens of the old. So I'm encouraging you to follow Aristoteles' advice and understand that it is the perspective shift that we should be aiming, because perspective shift would unlock much more than all of your resources, all of your money, and all of your talent. Changing the answer will give you incremental innovation, even revolutionary innovation. But if you want disruptive innovation, you need to be ready to change the question and revisit all of your assumptions. Because our business plan, we know by Steve Blank that it probably doesn't make sense anymore. It's a bunch of assumptions that are not tested against reality. We should reconsider everything in our business plan as an hypothesis that needs to be tested. So maybe as entrepreneurs, we should revisit our existing business model canvases and reinterpret each one of the certainties, our assumptions, through these new perspectives. Because maybe we'll find something completely different, completely new. We can follow Joan Miró's advice. This is a very famous Spanish painter that when people discover it at the museum, they say, well, my kid can do that. I mean, what is the beauty of this? What is the value of this? Well, precisely the value was that he was able to forget about all of the prejudices and go back to the essence of painting. He was able to forget. Change is a trap. We need to let go of some concepts to let in some other neural patterns and understandings. And I'm asking you to go ahead and do this massive change from scarcity to abundance, to become the masters of unlearning. Because it's not the technology, it's not the information, it's the abundance. And on top of that, it's your mindset, it is your culture. There was recently an article in Harvard Business Review that I very much enjoyed. This was the image at the top, and it suggested basically that we all have a pair of glasses of colors with which we interpret the reality. Hopefully this little talk has helped you to challenge those lenses of yours, at least temporarily, to acknowledge that there is an alternative reality for you and for your company up there. And if you want to go a little further, and you want to understand more about this concept of exponential change, exponential transformation, and how to leverage the abundance, you can go and visit and read this book, Salim Ismail's book, and enter our ecosystem, the OpenExo ecosystem. You'll see that there is research done precisely focusing on all of the companies that have been massively successful out there. And there's some patterns that have been observed, some attributes. It would really be nice if we could identify those attributes and apply them to our company. So that's precisely the value of the Exponential Organization book and the formula that we are proposing. This is the EXO canvas, which precisely will allow you, on the left, to use some attributes to connect to the abundances out there, and internally on the right, to manage all of those abundances, to have a new way to make scalable your value proposition and to grow at an exponential pace. And with this, my time is up. Thank you very much for your attention.